welcome to Baking with Chickens. I'm Christina and I'm going to show you how to make perfect pie crust every single time. This is my go-to recipe for an all butter crust. It's easy to do and you can fill it with all sorts of things. You'll see I failed miserably at this one. I broke the crust as I was trying to move it around. Blah, blah. Even failed pies are delicious. It's pretty awesome. This is the show about baking, making mistakes, learning from them, conquering your fear of baking, and nerdy chicken and egg facts. Go to my blog, bakingwithchickens.com, to get the recipe to follow along. Bok bok bake, let's go. My go-to recipe for pie crust is the perfect pie recipe from Simply Recipes. It's easy, it's simple, and I'll show you how to make it. First, we start off with 2.5 cups of flour, and then I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of salt and 1 teaspoon of sugar. I'm making a salty cardamom crust, so I added an extra tablespoon of salt, and I'm adding a tablespoon of cardamom. So once you have all these together, mix it around. Get it nice and incorporated. This is called a pastry knife. You can totally make this in a food processor, but I prefer to make it by hand just because I like feeling it. I'm kind of weird that way. I have some chilled butter here. This is 1 cup or 2 sticks of butter. I put it in the freezer, cut it up into little 1/2-inch chunks, and then I'm gonna mix it all in. So using cold butter is important here because you don't want melty butter or even like room temp because it has to stay cold to get all of the little pebbly bits. What you want in a pie dough is for the fat to be kind of suspended so that you can kind of see little dots of it in your dough so that when it bakes, those little fat pockets are gonna make a nice flaky crust. So if you have a pastry cutter here, like I do, you just basically roll it, cut it, and you cut the butter into the flour. If you have a food processor, you just kind of push the button, pulse it a few times. I just found that I really like this process of making it by hand. It's really meditative and I can kind of feel it a bit better and I can get the texture that I want. It definitely takes longer and it uses up more time, but pie is love and you put your love into that pie. This is my go-to recipe that I use every single time. It's called a pâte brisée or a pâte, I don't know, my French is shit. Pâte brise, help me. So the texture I'm looking for is like little pebbles. See, so like it's kind of getting to that texture right now. If you can see it, like it's really small. And then I'm gonna get in there with my fingers. You wanna make sure that you have cold hands when you're doing this. If your hands run hot, you're gonna melt the butter and it doesn't work. Like sometimes I'll kind of like dip my hands in some ice water before I do this. And then I'll just kind of like mix it around. So I just kind of take it and I feel the little butter balls and I kind of squish them between my fingers a little bit to get them flattened. This will help give you that flakiness in your pie dough that you really need. So I just kind of go like this and I like take it between my fingers and I like squish them. So the texture of your dough should feel a little bit like wet sand right now. And then the next step to bring all of this dough together, you're gonna have your ice water and then a tablespoon. So you're gonna drizzle some of this ice water into the pie dough a little bit at a time and then mix it all in with your fingers, or you can stir it, but again, I like feeling it with my hands. I just think it makes a big difference. If you've watched my scallion pancake episode, you'll see it's kind of a similar thing. It's about feeling the dough and the texture and knowing when it's done. You're not trying to get it to be super wet, you just need the dough to hold together. And if you're using a food processor, you just kind of drizzle the water in and you just start pulsing it and you'll see it start to come together. Okay, so see it's starting to come together, but it's still crumbly, but I wanna make sure I have it all incorporated. So the reason you wanna use ice water is because, again, you wanna keep that butter cold. You don't want it to melt. You need it to stay in those little cube pebble form. That is pretty good. It's starting to come together. It's sticky, but it's not too sticky, right? It's not like unmanageable and wet. So the next step is we need to split this dough in half and then wrap it in some cling wrap. I flatten it out a bit because I know that I'm gonna need to roll it later and it just makes it easier for me. Wrap it, put it in the fridge. It's gonna chill for 1 hour and I'm gonna go see the chickens. So my pie dough has been chilling for about an hour, and so I'm gonna take it out and we're ready to roll. So this recipe makes enough pie dough if you are making a bottom crust and a top crust, or it's enough to make 2 pies, depending on how much you wanna use it. So I'm only using it to do a pre-baked pie. First step, I like to roll my pie dough between 2 pieces of parchment paper. It helps not stick. I don't like putting too much flour down, and because I feel that that makes the dough more tough. Flatten the 2 pieces and then get rolling. So sometimes I'll check and just like lift this up and then replace it back down so it's not wrinkly. So it's nice and rolled out and flat. What I also like about my parchment method is that I can check the thickness of the dough without really breaking it or getting into it. I can kind of feel it underneath. How I check to see if it's large enough, I'll take my pie pan and I'll kind of hold it over it and see like, okay, does it fit around here? Is there enough to lift around the sides? Perfect. So now I'll show you how to transfer it into the pie pan. Lightly peel it. See, look, no sticking. Pretty cool. And I'll dust really lightly with some flour just to help it out here. Then I'll put it back on top, flip it over, and then release the other side. There's a couple ways that you can lift your pie dough into your pie tin. You can roll it onto your rolling pin and put it on there, but if it's delicate, it rips. This is my way of doing it. Take my pie tin, flip it upside down. I go like this. I have my parchment, so I hold on to my parchment paper, get my hand underneath it, tip it like that. Done. Look at that. So to shape your pie pan, I'm just gonna lift the edges slightly like this, gently drape it inside the pan to where it needs to be. So I have a lot of excess dough here hanging on to the edges, and I'm going to trim it. Kind of want it evenish. So I'm just gonna trim around the edge here, but I'm gonna give myself some extra space, like extra room, so that I can make a pretty crimp. Kind of like make it smooth around here, so like take out any lumps and bumps. Make sure that it's kind of touching the bottom of the pan where you want it to go. Here's how I make my little pie crimps. I like little fluted ones, so I kind of use my thumb and my finger like this, and I push the little ruffles where I want them to go, and then I lift and go all the way around. So I've now got a nice high ruffle. So if you are going to do a type of pie, like an apple pie or a fruit pie, where you would just pour in the filling and then bake it, this is all you would do. You would do this, take a fork, stab a couple on the bottom, pour in your filling, put it in the oven, and bake like your recipe says. If you're going to pre-bake your pie shell, stop. Before you move forward, I made a mistake, and I'm going to share this with you. So I did not read the instructions all the way to pre-bake this pie shell, and I skipped the step to chill it in the freezer for a few minutes before baking in the oven. Now, that's a really important step, because by putting it in the freezer to chill it, you're hardening the dough and the butter so that it's gonna keep the shape. So I just worked so hard to make these little ruffles. If I don't freeze it, it's going to just, when it bakes and goes into the hot oven, because the dough's already hot, it's just gonna go like bleh, and the side is just gonna slip down into the pan. So don't make that mistake. I'm gonna put it in the freezer right now to chill this for a few minutes before going into the oven. My pie has been chilling for 30 minutes, and I'm gonna go grab it. Look at this pie. It's so beautiful. Check it out. So this is what it should look like. So the next step is we need to poke some holes onto the bottom. So grab a fork, poke a bunch of holes in the bottom. You're gonna need to do this to allow the steam to escape. Otherwise, the bottom of the pie is gonna get all puffy and not pretty. Next step is we need to fill this pie with pie weights to hold the dough down as it bakes. So you can line this with aluminum foil, or because I already did this with parchment paper, I'm gonna use parchment paper. So this is a little big, I'm gonna cut it. So I'm going to put 2 sheets of parchment paper down. I have these beans that I use as my pie weights, and I just use them over and over again. You can also use rice. Any beans will do, they don't have to be black. I preheat my oven at 350 degrees. I lined the bottom of my oven with a sheet of foil so that if the butter from the edges of this pie starts dripping down, it doesn't start smoking up the oven. Pop these into the oven. It's gonna bake for about 60 to 70 minutes or so for a full bake. Let's go see the chickens. We'll come back after an hour. So whenever you're baking pies, bake it on the bottom rack of your oven because that's where it's hottest, and you want the bottom part of your pie to be baked all the way through and nice and crusty. You don't want a soggy bottom pie. So next I have to get my beans out of my pie without spilling everywhere. 1, 2. Bok, bok, bake, bitches. Thank you so much for watching my perfect pie crust recipe. I hope yours turned out awesome and you didn't break the crust like I did on mine. Happy eating, and time to go fill your pie with delicious yum-yums. Check out my Seville orange marmalade pie recipe if you want to make this beautiful, award-winning, prettiest pie winner. On my blog on bakingwithchickens.com, you can also get my recipe for how to make strawberry rhubarb pie. Oh my God. Fuck it, I don't even need to put stuff in this pie. I'm just gonna eat the crust.